Should you be worried about buying a second-hand e-bike? What are the risks, or is it just a cheap way of getting into it? I am going to try and find myself a used EMTB and look into it. You can buy pre-loved e-mountain bikes on places like Facebook Marketplace or eBay, although like we mentioned on the EMBN show recently, actually in the UK now, only approved sellers can do that on eBay, although sneakily you will see some people listing them as mountain bikes, but I am heading to my local bike shop. This is a Marin Alpine Trail E2, a bike that retails for £5,199 new in the UK, but I got this one, I think, for a bargain price of £2,500. Now, shops can be quite a good place to find second-hand bikes as well, because like this, it came in for a part exchange. The owner was after a brand new bike. And also shops, they trade on their reputation. So this bike needs to be good. So it's actually been fully checked over. It's had a lower fork service. And the shop wants to be happy they're selling something that is really good. So let's have a deeper dive to see if this was actually a bargain or not. It feels like this Marin Alpine Trail is a good bike, second-hand. Aluminium frame, so nice and robust. It's mixed wheel size, 150mm of rear travel. It's got a 160 fork. You see it's got a coil shock on there. So I think this would be a good UK bike. Although when you start looking into it, it's a little bit tatty. It's obviously been well ridden. A look around the rims, that gives you an idea of how hard the bike has been ridden. There are some scratches on the rear, but it does run nice and straight, so that's good. But there's a few bumps and scratches. You can see some big scratches on the frame, which is purely cosmetic, but it's worth bearing that in mind. But also there should be some bump stops on this down tube here to stop on the fork, and they have come off somehow. So whether or not there's been a big crash and they've come off, I don't know. But actually the fork on this is a medium frame. It doesn't hit anyway, so it's not actually a massive deal. So most of these initial checks are like you would do with any second-hand bike, e-bike or not. Checking bearings, so wheel bearings, they feel good. Full suspension bike, obviously, is well worth checking those linkage bearings because they could be a little bit expensive and a lot of faff to change. And it does feel like this bike's been looked after, so that's nice. It's got the Fox 38 fork up front, Performance Elite, so not top of the range, but still really good suspension on this bike. And it's actually got upgraded brakes, so it comes standard with Shimano SLX, but actually it's got Magura MT7, so that's quite nice. It's got Shimano drivetrain on here as well, and that's the next thing I want to check what's left on the drivetrain, see if the chain's been worn out or not. So it's got a simple chain checking tool, and this slides into the chain, and this tells us how worn the chain is, and therefore the drivetrain as well. So you see it hardly goes in, so actually this chain, although it's got a bit of surface rust on it, it's actually in decent condition, so it can't be very old at all, because that is well worth checking. If your chain is worn out, then you're probably going to have to replace the chain and the cassette at least as well, and that starts getting up into the hundreds of pounds. So although you can class them as consumables, the tyres and brake pads are worth checking as well, especially with tyres. That can be expensive if you need to replace them straight away. Again, good condition. You've got two Schwalbe's, got a tacky chan up front and an eddy current rear. Both with plenty of miles left in them. Same with the brake pads. So overall, this bike, cosmetically, it's a bit rough around the edges. I think it is a decent buy. But moving on now to one of the most important things is checking the state of the motor and the battery. So going on to the app, you can see that the battery health of this bike is very good. And importantly, it's actually got a brand new Shimano EP8 motor on here that's been replaced under warranty. So that is really nice to know that the motor on this bike is literally brand new. But there are some other significant things to check to make sure you aren't going to get ripped off. Make sure it's not a stolen bike. Does the story add up? Check things like a stolen bike register and check that the frame number is there and it hasn't been ground off. But the main reason most people I think are dubious about buying a second-hand e-bike is a drive system. The motor can be expensive to replace. Obviously, if you've bought the bike new, you've got the receipt in your hand, going back to the shop, you should find you get some help, you'll have a warranty, and they'll be happy to look after you. But if you buy a second-hand bike, it doesn't always work like that. So what does happen if you buy yourself a bargain and the motor goes south? Well, I'm going to travel south in the UK to a place in Ringwood and visit a man and his business who knows a thing or two about replacing and fixing motors. This is the eBike Motor Centre near Ringwood in Hampshire, where they fix used e-bike motors. Right, Pete, we've walked through, we've seen a lot of motors, a lot of kit, a lot of stuff I recognise, some fairly advanced tools, I would say. So what sort of work are you doing here?
Well, we repair e-bike motors, and that's basically it.
Is that mainly sort of warranty stuff, or is that a bit of private individuals riding their mountain bikes, having problems sending them to you?
It's mostly for the private individuals and also for the bike shops. We do a trade account for the bike shops as well. But we're part of Bros. We've got two businesses. One side is eBike Motor Centre. The other side is EMCB, which is the Bros Warranty Service Centre for the UK. And we just signed a contract with Bafang. Okay. So it's going to be busy.
And so what do you think about buying a second-hand e-mountain bike? Do you think that's a risk for someone if the motor goes completely wrong?
Depends what motor's in it. Obviously, if it's repairable, then it's not so much of a risk. If it's a motor that's not currently repairable, then yeah, you might want to be careful.
So what are the big ones we're looking for that are repairable by you guys?
So it'd be anything powered with Bros, Bosch, Yamaha, Mahler, Impulse, Panasonic.
So the bike I've got is the Shimano EP8. It's brand new. The bike is second-hand, but the motor's actually brand new. Would you see any issues with that?
Sadly, Shimano are one of the only companies that they won't give us any software. So at the moment, although we can and we used to repair their motors, and we do support them as much as we can with bearing sales and internal parts, we can't afford to repair them because obviously we need to make sure that we can do the latest software updates, etc. And that's just not possible until they talk to us.
So if my motor went wrong, and I'm of average mechanical knowledge, don't know that much about motors, to be fair, what are my options? I've just got to buy a new motor.
At the moment, yeah. If it's outside of warranty, obviously, yeah.
How much do you think that would set me back?
At the moment, they're about £1,200.
Okay, pretty spendy. So what are the most common motor issues you're seeing here, particularly on e-mountain bikes?
Water ingress.
Okay, and that's always from the seals around the bottom bracket, the drive shaft?
Yeah, can be through several reasons. Obviously, they're not highly sealed down there because sealing leads to friction and friction leads to battery consumption. But what tends to happen is they're fine for your normal road puddles and things like that. And that's more or less what they're designed for. Take them off-road if you're doing deep water fording, power washing or hosing the motor area when you get back from your off-road work, or putting it on a car rack in wet roads and wet conditions will all kill your motor.
So you think that as an issue? Probably from my end, I do ride in horrible conditions, but if I'm washing the bike, even with, I have one of these works washers, it's not a crazy powerful jet wash, but it is a jet wash of sorts. Is that something that I need to be really careful of, is just avoid the motor completely?
Yeah. When you get to the motor area, if you just use a soft brush, some sort of, detergent, and then sprinkle it, and any pressure going into that area will find its way into the bearing. So what happens is the tiniest droplet of moisture going into the bearing will start to rust the balls and racer of the bearing, and then that's the beginning of the end. So it might take 3 months to destroy itself, and you won't remember that you pressure washed it 3 months ago and you wonder why it broke, but they're connected.
So when it comes to motors eventually breaking, it starts most of the time, you're saying, probably with water ingress. What comes next? Is it a bit of play or is it noise? And then eventually that leads to it just stopping?
Yeah, normally you'll get like a rough bearing noise, similar to what you'd have if you spin your front wheel when your bearings are starting to go, you get that sort of rumbling, rough noise. That will start very slowly. Unfortunately, because it starts so slowly, you don't tend to notice it because every time you ride your bike, it just gets a little bit worse. But if you ignore it, then yeah, it's the bearing will create wear. and then that will let water through the seals or more water through the seals. So even going through normal puddles will then get into the motor, and that's the beginning of the end then.
So once it started to wear, it's only going to get worse because the more movement.
Yeah, and it gets worse real quick.
Okay.
Some of the motors now are coming out with very, very small ball bearings in the bearings, and once they start to go, they can go in a ride or two. So yeah.
So if you're looking at, say you were going to buy a second-hand bike, if you're looking at the motor, if you're riding it, test riding it, is there any way of sort of knowing the health of that thing before you buy it?
Yeah, I would, well, if it was me, I would drop the chain off the front chain ring if you can, so that you can hear the motor without all the chain noise. Wind the motor backwards and forward by hand while you've got your ear down there, and listen for that rough grinding noise. You can also obviously feel the play in the cranks. Some motors will have a little bit of side-to-side play, but they shouldn't have any radial play. So, yeah, just make sure the crank feels smooth.
And if someone's got a motor that you service and they send it to you, what do you think the cost implications might be of an e-bike? I know it's a big question, but what do you think the cost implications might be of getting a motor fixed?
It can vary wildly. It's always the first question we get when anybody emails us or phones us, how much is it going to be? We don't know what's wrong with it. So, I mean, we do have set fees. So if somebody wants a full overhaul, for example, that's between 257 and 315, depending on the motor type. But if it's a repair, if they send it in on a service repair basis, then it could be £50 for a bearing, up to an exchange motor. If it becomes uneconomically viable to repair it, then we can normally offer either another motor or an exchange motor or a new motor. On average, across the board, it's about £220 per motor. So that would be, normally when we open them up, there's 3 or 4 bearings that have failed and all the cleaning and grease work to do.
That doesn't sound too catastrophic if you think, new tyres and new drivetrain could cost that on a second-hand bike anyway, so it's fairly reassuring.
No, it's bloody cheap, to be honest.
Well, I think that was actually quite reassuring news from Pete at the eBike and Motor Centre. It's great to see a business like that gets people back on their bikes and helping the shops keep customers happy. Buying a second-hand bike with no warranty will always bring greater risk, but that's why they're cheaper. If you buy a new bike with a Shimano motor, you'll get support from a 2-year warranty. I actually reached out to Shimano to try and get an answer on the out of warranty and second-hand support. And it was acknowledged that it was a place where they need to find a solution. But if you're the original owner, the bike shop should be the first port of call. Although the eBike Motor Centre can't currently help me with my Shimano motor, I have been looking around. I found a couple of places on eBay selling EP800 motors for £600 new from Germany, and they've sold 114 of them so far. But I found one EP801 motor on there cheaper at £530 though. A quick search shows £500 Bosch Gen 4 CX motors with 12-month warranty on eBay from a bike shop, but that will need programming for your bike, so it's not necessarily a straight swap. So the verdict, well, I think £2,500 for the Marin is a really good price and really good bang for buck on a bike that is likely to last someone a very long time. Let me know if you've ever thought about buying a second-hand e-mountain bike, or even if you've done it and you found problems, get involved in the comments down below.